Welcome back to the 5th video in this series covering the recent leaks that happened and were gathered by data miners, in which we found a large number of very anticipated and unexpected vehicles. However, also many of these vehicles had just been floating around in the files for God knows how long. So don't get too hyped about what you're going to see, but for the naval things, I'm going to jump straight to what everyone wants to hear. For Germany, there was 4, technically 5, battleships found in the files, one of which was the Tirpitz. In fact, there's actually 2 Tirpitz, although we only got an image of one of them. One was a 1944 configuration, and the first one, I guess, was sometime before that. I don't think I need to inform anyone here what the Tirpitz is exactly. In fact, I'm sure more people will be able to tell me about it than I can read off Wikipedia. Now, something I could tell you that perhaps Wikipedia or smart people in the comments won't be able to is actually, apparently there has been a Tirpitz model floating around in the files for quite some time, and that this is actually a different model. You see, the older model wasn't nearly as detailed, and it's presumed it was either used for internal testings and or for their trailer of the initial announcement of naval forces. Not all too surprising. Also, when the T90 and Leo 2A6 were added for their April Fool's event, when they finally came in the game, they didn't use the same models. They actually had to redo them. So it makes sense that they would have to redo the Tirpitz if they were to actually bring it into game, which in a sense is actually kind of terrifying if they're going to bring that into game, because I don't think there's a single ship that could hold up to the Tirpitz. That's not some right after World War I ship like the Hyuga. That is a Second World War battleship. Was actually launched in April of 1939, and I'm pretty sure for a period of time her and her sister Bismarck were actually the largest ships in the oceans until Yamato set sail. Although don't quote me on that. But to put things into perspective, this is a big ship. This is not some 7.0 vessel. At least I hope it's not some 7.0 vessel. But the fun for Germany doesn't end there, as they're getting 2 Scharnhorst class battleships, the Scharnhorst herself as well as the Gneisenau. Why 2 of them? Well, I can only assume that one's going to be a premium. And the final vessel is a bit more on the scale of things that we currently have in game, the Gneisenau, a First World War battleship. Now, while German vessels were probably the most exciting, they're not the only ones who got really well-known vessels. In the files for the British was the Renown class battle cruiser, which with its 6 15-inch guns is definitely on another level, perhaps not comparable to the Tirpitz, but definitely on another level. The other British battle cruiser found in the files was the HMS Hood, which is why I jumped straight to the British ships and not the US ones. We now have a Bismarck class battleship, we have the HMS Hood, we have Swordfish, we have all the pieces of the puzzle. Now we just need to put them together. Although comparing their stats, I gotta say the Hood and Tirpitz are actually kind of on the same level. Well, the Tirpitz wins out in armor, but they both have 8 15-inch guns, 2 on each of 4 turrets. And those 2 massive vessels aren't the only ones that were found for the British. There was also a Fermal D601 with the title Big Captain, probably just a reskin, maybe for some sort of upcoming event. And the last one, not really British, but more of Irish, but probably end up in the British tree, unfortunately, is the Le Orla Peacock-class corvette, which we already have one of those in game, so I don't really need to tell you about it. Of the ships for the United States that were found, the one that I was most excited for was the Pennsylvania-class battleship Arizona. Even though I don't actually know a whole lot about this ship, it's one of my favorite battleships that is sadly remembered for sinking in Pearl Harbor. She was armed with 4 turrets, each carrying 3 14-inch 356mm guns, and had 13-inch belt armor with 18-inch turret armor. Would be quite an adequate ship to go against some of the other ones we've already seen. Next one is something that we actually have already seen before, is the Alaska class battle cruiser, which would definitely be able to handle some of the First World War battleships we have right now, but compared to the other things we saw, like Arizona, she's a bit outclassed. The last 2 ships for the United States was the Baltimore class cruiser USS Pittsburgh, which I assume is probably going to be either an upcoming event ship or a main tech tree alternative to the Baltimore. The other one was the USS Indianapolis, a Portland class cruiser that has similar armaments to the Baltimore. So to get onto the United States' main opponent, the Empire of Japan, they received 3 new battleships as well as a cruiser, the Fuso, the Issei, and the Yamashiro, and the cruiser Yabai. All 3 of these battleships have relatively the same loadout of 12 14-inch guns with 2 in each turret of 6 turrets. And the cruiser is a light cruiser with 6 14cm cannons. It looks a little bit better than some of their early light cruisers, but we'll have to wait for it to be in game to see. Of their battleships, they are, well, on par with the other battleships we're talking here. Guns are a little bit smaller. Most of these ships are right after First World War, but were modernized right before the Second. The Fuso is primarily a well-known ship for its tall superstructure, so it's exciting to see that one come, assuming it is. Honestly, Personally, I feel like most of these ships are going to come sooner than we think, possibly even what the plan for the next patch was. Partially why I think that is because just about everybody is getting new ships that are in this tier, including even Russia, who is getting 2 new battle cruisers, a battleship, and a destroyer. The battleship is the Gangut class Sevastopol that was renamed into, the Russian name is really hard to pronounce, it's Paris Commune, some communist thing. This ship only has 12-inch guns, though it has 12 of them, but still kind of on the level of things we currently have in game. The first battlecruiser found in the files for them was the Kronstadt class battlecruiser with the designation Project 69. Nice. This, I have a feeling, is going to be very controversial, because you see, this ship was never finished. There's supposed to be 2 of them, and they were laid down in 1939. You could probably assume what happened after that. Kronstadt's hull did actually survive the war. According to Wikipedia, was 10% complete in 1945. Unfortunately, by that time, she was considered obsolete. They considered turning to an aircraft carrier, but scrapped her instead. I guess technically you could say they did actually see combat, as both the cities these vessels were stationed in, one of which was Leningrad, were invaded by the Germans. Actually, I don't think the Germans ever actually got into the city of Leningrad, or St. Petersburg now, but they intended to, so same thing. Regardless of that point, this is a vehicle that will most likely go into the main tech tree. That was not only not complete, that at the start of the war, it was estimated to only be 10.6% complete. That's for the one that actually survived the war. The one that the Germans scrapped was 11.6% complete, apparently. Try to think, what is 10% of a tank? The tracks? If you have the tracks done for a tank, can we add this tank to the game? I believe Gaijin's reasoning for why they're going to add incomplete vessels to the games, because, well, first of all, Russia is running low on stronger vehicles, while the other nations are not. But also, when building a ship, you don't need to do much testing or variations. You can't just put everything together and hope it works, because you can't make a prototype battleship. Technically you can, but you still have to make use of that battleship because they're expensive. That's mostly why I don't like the idea of paper vehicles or even incomplete vehicles being added to the game. Incomplete I'm more okay with so long as it was mostly, to a degree, complete. Here we have something that was mostly not complete. To make my point further, the design was not completely done when the ship had already been laid down. According to this Wikipedia page, they were actually changing up what the armament was supposed to be last minute, changing from 305mm guns to 380mm guns. And the changes in this design required for them to redo parts of the ship, which added weight. However, despite them actually having the technical data down yet, the design was approved because construction had already begun. Now, in the end, it didn't really matter because the Germans invaded, but had the Germans not invaded for whatever reason, they would have to figure this stuff out along the way and would have changed the ship's performance on the final outcome, not foreseen in the papers. And this doesn't only happen in ships, of course it happens in aircraft, but also in tanks. Primary example I have for this is the front plate of the Tiger 1. The drawings of the vehicle ask for a 100mm plate. However, as you see in game and reality, it is 102mm. I'm no engineer, so I don't entirely understand the reasons why this was a situation, but from my understanding is that German engineers were having a hard time making a 100mm plate, but they could do a 102mm plate. Being thicker than the actual request, not by too much, they decided to go with that anyways. That was a situation in which the final outcome was different than what was planned. I'm sure there's plenty of other examples of this in tanks, planes, and boats. That stuff would all take a lot of research and probably be best for another video on the subject of paper tanks in video games or historical inaccuracy in general, which I have some pretty strong opinions about. But generally, I see if Gaijin does go through and add this vessel to the game, we are opening Pandora's box. In some degree, Pandora's box is already opened just a crack, but this would definitely be open the lid entirely. Now, I think we've sat on the subject of this vessel for far too long, so let's get on to the next battlecruiser that Russia is getting. It is the Stalingrad class battlecruiser, which is another unfinished canceled project. However, this one, I guess you could also say technically did see combat, but not really. What happened here is these were actually designed during the war and construction began post-war. These vessels were going to be immense, actually being a little bit longer than Yamato. However, Russia at the time wasn't exactly in a great situation because World War II just happened, and after the death of Stalin, the vessels were canceled. The most complete one had its hull done and was actually launched. However, it was used as a target hulk, having anti-ship missiles shot at it. It did technically survive, though damage was quite immense. Eventually, it was scrapped. I believe this vessel is quite well known, mainly thanks to its appearance in World of Warships, but it is another incomplete Soviet vessel. If we are going to go with these incomplete vessels, does that mean that there's some pretty dumb ships that Germany or Japan could receive? And God forbid if it ever stretches out to aircraft or tanks. The last vessel that was found for Russia was was the Project 30 Bis Simile, or whatever you would pronounce that as. It is just a Project 30 Bis, different anti-air armament than a Project 30. Now that's not actually the end of the vessels that were found in the files. There was 2 boats found for Italy. One was the P420 Blazit Subvero Art, which looks like the Subvero but with 2 40s instead of a 76. And the other was a torpedo boat, the MS-74-2A, which I think has been in the files for a long while. I think it was in the initial trailer that announced the Italian fleet coming, but for some reason never came to game. And that there is just about all the vessels that were found in this data mine. Makes me very concerned about the future of situations, though it does also bring some interesting conversations about how incomplete could a vessel be for it to still be justifiable to add to game and still maintain the title of historically accurate in any context. However, it is important to note that these were just found in the files. It does not mean that they're coming to game, but I would not be surprised if we did see most of these vessels and tech trees sometime in the future. Be sure, I really want to actually hear your thoughts and opinions on these topics down below in the comments. Before I end the video, I'd like to shout out to my patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs. Thank you very much, guys. If you want to see more videos, be sure to hit the bell icon. I do have one more video in this series from these data mines planned to come out rather soon, and it's going to be a very strange one. So be sure to hit the bell icon because you're not going to want to miss this. In the terms of bonus news, hey, remember that guy who accidentally leaked a whole bunch of videos back in like 2019? I talked about him in some of my other videos. Some of the vehicles that were leaked there appeared in these leaks as well. Well, I went back to his DeviantArt page, which I have been going back to from time to time to see if he accidentally leaks anything else. And I noticed something. Recently, he had put up the Yak 28B model for War Thunder, but I noted that the antenna at the end of this Yak 28B was different than the one we have in game. This one has a weird fork to it. I also noted that the thing at the back was open, almost as if it was an air brake. However, I was also thinking perhaps that is the drag chute. The only Yak 28 I could find an image of that was properly labeled that shared this 2-pronged antenna was the Yak 28 SR. However, that image did not share all the characteristics of the one we have this 3D model of. So is this another Yak 28 that we could expect in the future, or was this a modeling mistake?